So I've decided to do a short talk on pre- and post-biological minds. I'll probably forget some things, so there will most likely be a follow-up video after this one. To understand the fundamental nature of minds and intelligence, we will have to understand the fundamental nature of the universe, which means the nature of the photon, the electron, and quantum entanglement. The reason why the quantum nature is important to understand in terms of pre- and post-biological intelligences is because you, yourself, towards all your cells, are entangling information to your organs, down to the cells, down to the chemistry that needs to be provided, so that each individual aspect of your chemistry can achieve the necessary goals. But we will get to that bit soon, after this section. So, what are the fundamental parts of the universe? How does matter come to exist? Well, in physics, they see under many experiments that a photon is excited from a field, and then this photon goes on to travel upon a field. That's how it looks. But what's really happening is that the field, sometimes called a Higgs field, sometimes called the 0-point field, or the ether, or vacuum, quantum vacuum, this is the field that gets distorted. It gets excited, they say, and the photon pops out of this field. This is a field that is universal. It is everywhere through everything that we know that exists. The photon, then, by the nature of this field, forms the electron. It circles twice, so 720 degrees, forming a torus. And this is the topology of the electron. We don't get to see the electron because it moves so fast. We only ever see the fields. We only ever see the scattering or the fields. Or when it's in a charged relationship forming a molecule. I personally refer to this quantum vacuum energy as the universal field, or the first dimension. And so what is this fabric of the universe that underlies every single thing and is responsible for all matter and energy? It is the lowest form of energy. It is a light. It is a temperature. It is just the lowest form of everything, from which everything can be excited and magnified. And so this brings us to the question, how is the photon excited out from the vacuum energy into a photon and then into an electron? This is something that even current physics is still trying to reconcile. The understanding of why, how. Because science has become completely redundant. They're only concerned with measurements, and believe that if they measure enough things for enough time, this will give them the reasons why. But unfortunately it doesn't. Because the reasons are unfortunately beyond the physicists' line of thinking that they're conditioned into thinking. The reasons are to be accessed by a philosophical thinking. So how and why do photons excite out of the universal field and create electrons, which then go on to create relationships of fields for chemical creations? To answer this question, I will also have to explain what I would call the second dimension, also known as a morphospace, morphogenic space, or platonic space, if you were to look at the work of people like Michael Levin in bioelectricity. So, what is this morphospace, or second dimension, and how does it work? Well, every environment or body, we'll call it a body, even if it's just a molecule, we will call it a body, or pre-molecule, a couple of atoms, the beginnings of a molecule. Even these things generate a field. This field, depending on the complexity of the body, receives information from its environment and transmits information to its inner environment. Think of an atom, for example, transmitting information into the nucleus, to the proton, which will then determine the mass created by the quarks and the gluons inside and the charm quarks, the rate in which they should get excited and create the gradients of the forces within the atom. And as we get larger and look at cells, the cell itself, the membrane, is receptive to the environment in which the cell exists. And the cell itself is an environment for the organelles within the cell. So this already is the beginning of life. Single cells registering their environment and ordering their inner environment. And now imagine a liver cell, for example. It lives within the liver. The liver itself generates a field where the liver can engage with the environment around it, the other organs even, but also is a field for the internal parts of the liver, down to the cells, the organelles, and even the atoms and electrons that create the molecules that create the cells. And then we zoom out a little more. The organ, the liver, is a part of the body, whether it be animal or human. Let's say human. And the human is a field for its internal structures, for its organs, the cells. But the human is also a part of a larger environment. And so this continues to keep going. The planet, the sun, a galaxy, a heliosphere, a universe. It's fields nested within fields. And so minds nested within minds, and perceptions nested within perceptions. These fields are what dictate what molecules, what chemistry needs to be produced when and where. This operates by creating a positive feedback spiral. And so the more molecularly complex a body becomes, the more environmental minds and fields the body interacts with. And a human, as a perfect example, is able to interact with fields or minds beyond the immediate environment. So a perfect example is something we call intuition. This is the ability to absorb information through entanglement from a mind beyond your immediate environment. You are entangled to all the minds and all the fields that are involved in your existence in the current moment. And so this platonic space, or the second dimension, is what is responsible for bringing new chemicals and new molecules where they've been needed based on their environments, regardless of scale. And similarly to the universal field of energy, exists throughout all things. This space, the second dimension, exists throughout all things just as the first dimension does. So this morphogenetic space or platonic space recognizes the patterns that already exist in a certain field or environment. It recognizes the stages they're in, where they need to go, how they need to grow, and what they need, and then stimulates the chemistry through bringing in a photon from the universal field to create an electron, and can magnify it to whatever frequency or voltage that is required to create the necessary molecules. This means that the two dimensions, the universal field and the platonic space, are both transcendental, meaning that they exist independent of and prior to physical, chemical materializations. The reality of these two fields has implications for our current understanding of biology. This means that it is not just the genome alone that is responsible for the protein synthesis or for the other behaviors of the cell. This means there is a social aspect involved, based on the environment and based on the communication between cells and the environment. This is why when they finished the Human Genome Project decades ago and stated once they'd coded the whole genome that they would eliminate cancer or have medications that could eliminate cancer within the next decade, and they never did. This is because they don't yet understand that there is field interference. This is the primary cause of rogue cells that soon grow new goals and sometimes get together in mass numbers, creating what we call cancer. And just to reiterate this point on the morphogenetic space or platonic space, it recognizes patterns and also recognizes the goals or needs which these patterns need to achieve or can achieve. It does this by understanding potentials for this pattern to grow into. This is what dictates what chemistry is needed for the goals to be reached, and the potential best goal to be reached in that environment for that body at that time. I will also now briefly touch upon entanglement and what this means when considering fields and minds and environments. What we witness in laboratories is, say, John has a field or a particle, and its position is not yet measured. And Jane, in another part of the lab or a different lab completely, also has a particle which is in superposition, so not yet measured, not yet decided. And Jane then takes a measurement and sees that the positive aspect of this particle is facing upward, and this in turn at that time changes the particle that John is looking at exactly that time, and the position of John's particle corresponds to the position of Jane's particle. This is currently our understanding of entanglement. These are two fully entangled particles at that moment between John and Jane. And what physicists have not yet quite understood is that it's not the measurement itself or the observer that is responsible for determining the position of the particle. It is the act of attention, for placing attention on the particle. This is what causes the act of determining what direction it faces, and due to two people paying attention, causing entanglement. Fields also have free will. Everything in the universe is based off of free will. At the beginning, the goals are down to necessity, when the molecules are low, or atoms, or particles. As they become more complex and engage with more larger parts of fields and minds, the goals become more complex, and the will becomes more complex. And so, like everything that we know from small to large, it's to do with scales. Everything is scalable. Entanglement is no different. It's also scalable. The heliosphere receives entangled information from the galaxy, for example. The human body also receives entangled information in a direct communication from things outside of the planet. This is the fundamental nature of what we call intuition. We have to understand that on a larger level, there are bodies of plasma that formed relationships and exist in helical structures that were the founders of this universe many billions of years before any planets or galaxies or beings were formed. Ultimately, these plasmas, because of their giant size and their entangled nature, and that they are memory themselves, these things are responsible for much more than we can actually understand at this point. And why are these plasmas helical in structure? Because this is a topological structure of electromagnetism. At some scale, every single thing is helical or toroidal by structure. So intuition is when an entity or body perceives information directly from outside of the immediate environment via field entanglement, from a larger mind, to navigate the present moment and likely future with a level of scope beyond the immediate senses. For this to start making some sense, I will also mention how time works briefly. And we have to remember that everything works to scale. And so just because you are your human size and your cell is many millions of times smaller than you, it still experiences its own time within its own environment, and it has its own lifetime that is not comparable and not so different as to your lifetime and what you're experiencing. The experiential aspects of change that we call time are products of mass. If we look at the atom, for example, there are gradients of mass and thresholds between gradients. These are created by different radiating powers and then negatively constraining boundaries. This creates the mass. And this structure continues all the way up to the size of the universe. So gravity itself, over this planet, around this planet, this particular gravity is a product of the planet's spin, within the environment of the heliosphere, and all the other bodies within the heliosphere together are all creating this relationship of mass that we call gravity. Mass is time, order, entropy, and gravity. All these same things are mass, and mass is an energetic state. Like within the proton, we have gluons and quarks, and these things vibrate around, creating a stabilized energy radiating and constraining from the electron, creating mass. So mass is time, and it is scalable from the small scales to the big scales, all experienced differently by the different bodies within those gradients of mass. I hope that made sense. And so what does it all mean? Because there has to be meaning and reasons. Why is it at the quantum level, at the photon level, where the photon has no mass, which means it is beyond time, and is constantly just borrowed from a field that exists through all things, also beyond time? Why is this holographic principle there at all? What is this energy? And why is it these nested minds, like Russian dolls, nested minds of perceptions, fields, and interactions, and intuitions, why are they existing also in this relationship with the universal field? The answer is quite simple, yet profound and beautiful. The universe is a system to understand itself through all possibilities deriving from the one field, the one ground state of energy. Defining itself, its one basic, simple layer of energy through all other possibilities that could be found from this energetic state. That's all for now. Thanks for listening.